Anna nervously adjusted the delicate lace collar of her simple dress, trying to mask the anxiety bubbling inside her. Tonight, she and James were heading to dinner at his mother's house, the formidable Mrs. Margaret. These visits always felt like a grueling test for Anna. Mrs. Margaret, a commanding woman with a taste for extravagance, had taken an instant dislike to Anna from the very start. In her eyes, a humble girl from a small rural town was no match for her son, a promising young lawyer with a bright future. Sensing Anna's unease as they approached the upscale neighborhood, James gently squeezed her hand, offering a reassuring smile. "Hey, don't worry, it's gonna be fine," he murmured, though a hint of doubt lingered in his tone. Anna knew James cared for her deeply, but she also knew he often struggled to stand up to his mother's overbearing nature, leaving her to face the tension alone. As they stepped into Mrs. Margaret's lavish apartment, Anna couldn't help but feel out of place. The space was a showcase of wealth, ornate furniture, gilded framed paintings, and sparkling chandeliers that seemed to mock her modest upbringing in a quiet countryside home. She felt like an outsider in this world of opulence. Mrs. Margaret greeted them in the living room, her sharp eyes scanning Anna with undisguised disdain. "Well, here you are at last," she said coolly, her voice devoid of any warmth. "James, darling, have you at least taught your wife how to behave at a proper dinner table?" James glanced at Anna with an apologetic look, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Mom, come on, why start with that?" he muttered under his breath. "I'm only trying to ensure everything goes smoothly." Mrs. Margaret snapped back with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Last time, she managed to spill gravy all over my heirloom tablecloth. Honestly, Anna, a few lessons in etiquette wouldn't hurt." Anna felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, the sting of her mother-in-law's words cutting deep. She tried to brush off the constant jabs, but each visit made it harder to keep her composure. She loved James and wanted their relationship to work, but Mrs. Margaret seemed determined to make her life miserable. They moved into the dining room, where an extravagant table awaited them. Polished silverware gleamed under the soft light. Fine china sparkled, and the spread included dishes like roasted turkey with cranberry sauce and creamy mashed potatoes. Classic comforts that somehow felt intimidating in this setting. Anna took her seat, sitting up straight and hoping to blend into the background. At one point, Mrs. Margaret turned to her with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So, Anna, how's life out there in your little hometown? Still tending to the chickens and pigs?" James frowned, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "Mom, can you not?" he grumbled softly. "What?" "I'm just curious," Mrs. Margaret replied with feigned innocence, sipping her wine. "I've always wondered what people do in those remote places. It must be dreadfully dull. No theater, no fine dining, just the same old routine day after day." Anna clenched her fists under the table, fighting the urge to defend the beauty of her hometown, the rolling hills, and the tight-knit community that had shaped her. She bit her tongue, not wanting to spark a full-blown argument over dinner. "It's nice there," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tension. "Fresh air, kind folks." "Kind folks are lovely, of course." Mrs. Margaret smirked, twirling her fork with an air of superiority. "But kindness alone doesn't get you far, does it? You need ambition, education, and a certain standing in society." Then, as if to deliver a final blow, Mrs. Margaret leaned forward, her tone dripping with condescension. "You know, Anna, my housekeeper called in sick this week. Since you come from such a hard-working family, used to rolling up your sleeves, why don't you give your mom a ring? She could come down from the country and fill in, scrub a few floors for me." A heavy silence fell over the dining room, the clink of cutlery ceasing as the words hung in the air. James froze, his jaw dropping in disbelief at his mother's audacity, while Anna struggled to process the insult disguised as a casual suggestion. He had always known his mother could be harsh, but to take it this far? Anna felt hot tears streaming down her cheeks, the weight of the moment almost unbearable. It was just too much. Mrs. Margaret had crossed every line imaginable. Wiping her tears with the back of her hand, Anna forced herself to meet Mrs. Margaret's gaze, managing a tight, controlled smile. In a steady voice, she said, "I'll make the call, okay?" James hadn't anticipated such composure from her. He'd braced himself for an emotional breakdown, expecting her to storm out in tears, yet here she was, responding with quiet strength and grace. Even Mrs. Margaret seemed caught off guard. She had clearly been waiting for drama, for hysterics and sobs. The dinner ended in a heavy, oppressive silence, the clinking of silverware against plates the only sound. Anna barely touched her food, her mind racing over what had just happened as she picked at the roast chicken and mashed potatoes, a typical Sunday meal that now tasted like cardboard. She was already plotting her next steps, her thoughts a tangled mess. The car ride home with James was equally silent, the tension thick between them. He felt a gnawing guilt and a sense of powerlessness, fully aware that his mother had gone too far, but clueless about how to make things right. Back at their small apartment, Anna perched on the edge of the bed, feeling utterly defeated. Mrs. Margaret's cruel words echoed relentlessly in her mind. "Call that small-town mother of yours. She can come scrub my floors." James paced the room, his own guilt mirroring hers, unable to find the right words. Finally, he knelt beside her, gently taking her hand in his. "I'm so sorry, Anna. For me? For her?" "You know how she can be," he murmured, his voice thick with regret. Anna turned away, unable to meet his eyes. "How she can be? Arrogant, cold, full of prejudice. And you, her precious James, either can't or won't stand up to her." She shot back, her tone sharp with hurt. For the first time in their relationship, a seed of doubt took root in her heart. Was it even worth staying with a family that made her feel like an outsider, constantly belittled and unworthy? She wiped her eyes again and looked at James, her voice breaking. "I just don't know, James. I'm exhausted from this, from her constant disdain." He pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her close. "I love you, Anna. I'll make sure this doesn't happen again. I'll talk to her," he promised. But Anna knew these were empty words. James always said he'd handle it, yet nothing ever changed. Mrs. Margaret remained untouchable, her authority unchallenged. Staring out the window at the city lights twinkling below like distant stars, Anna felt just as far away, just as isolated. Her mother's advice from a recent phone call came back to her. "Don't let anyone walk all over you, sweetheart. You deserve respect." Reaching for her phone, Anna dialed her mom's number. "Hey, Mom, it's me," she said softly. "Hi, honey. How are you holding up?" came the warm reply from Ms. Nina. Anna's voice cracked as fresh tears fell. "Mom, she did it again." Ms. Nina listened patiently as Anna poured out the painful details of the disastrous dinner. She didn't interrupt or offer unsolicited advice, simply letting her daughter release the pent-up hurt. When Anna finished, a long pause hung over the line. "Sweetheart, don't let it get to you," Ms. Nina finally said, her tone gentle but firm. "I'm coming over." Anna's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Coming over? Where? Why? To Mrs. Margaret's place?" "Mom, you're not seriously?" Anna stammered, struggling to find the right words. She pictured her humble, hard-working mother stepping into Mrs. Margaret's pristine, upscale condo, a world of polished marble and designer furniture. The thought felt absurd, even humiliating. "Mom, please don't. I don't want you to," she pleaded. Honey, don't worry about it. I know what I'm doing. Just trust me, Ms. Nina replied, her voice brimming with a quiet determination that left Anna momentarily speechless. But Mom, I don't get why you'd put yourself through this, Anna pressed, still confused. You'll understand soon enough, sweetheart. Just have a little faith in me, her mother assured her. There was such conviction, such unshakable strength in Miss Nina's words, that Anna couldn't help but fall silent, wondering what her mother had in mind. I'll be there tomorrow, all right? That's fine, Mom, Anna replied softly, a wave of relief washing over her, though she couldn't shake off the lingering confusion swirling in her mind. She ended the call and stepped back into the room, her footsteps quiet on the hardwood floor. James was still perched on the edge of the bed, his head hanging low, lost in thought. Hey, what did she say? He asked, his voice tinged with curiosity as he glanced up at her. She's coming over, Anna answered simply, her tone neutral. She's heading to your mom's place. James lifted his head fully now, his brow furrowing in bewilderment. Why on earth would she do that? He questioned, clearly puzzled. I'm not sure. Anna shrugged, her hands fidgeting slightly. She just told me to trust her on this. James's expression darkened, a frown settling on his face as he tried to piece things together. He knew his mother well, a reserved, unassuming woman who never meddled in other people's affairs. What could possibly prompt Anna's mom to show up at his mother's house, especially after that humiliating suggestion they'd discussed earlier? I think we should try to talk her out of it, James said after a moment, his voice cautious. This could get really awkward, you know. Anna turned to him, her eyes flashing with a hint of defiance. What? Are you scared? Afraid your dear mommy won't approve? She teased, her tone sharp but playful. James's cheeks flushed a deep red, embarrassment creeping in. Don't be ridiculous, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. I just think it might be for the best if we... But Anna cut him off, her frustration bubbling over. And I think this is the only way forward, she insisted. I'm done keeping quiet, done putting up with her little games. Let my mom handle her for once. The next morning, the air in Mrs. Margaret's neatly kept suburban home was thick with an odd tension. After last night's strained dinner, complete with overcooked roast chicken and a side of passive-aggressive comments, the atmosphere felt almost suffocating. Mrs. Margaret's eyes glinted with impatient anticipation. She was convinced that any moment now, a downtrodden small-town woman, Anna's mother, would arrive, desperate for any odd job to make ends meet. Picturing this scene in her mind, Mrs. Margaret felt a smug sense of triumph, as if she'd already put Anna in her place and proven her superiority to everyone around. Time crawled by at an agonizing pace. She made a point of glancing at her watch repeatedly, letting out an exaggerated sigh each time, as if to say the help was already late and wasting her precious morning. James, trying to ease the tension, offered to pour her another cup of coffee, even suggesting they pair it with some blueberry muffins from the local bakery down the street. But Mrs. Margaret waved him off with a dismissive flick of her wrist, her lips curling into a sneer. Just then, the doorbell chimed sharply through the house. A self-satisfied smirk spread across Mrs. Margaret's face as she hurried to answer it, brushing past James with an air of authority. She was certain she'd open the door to a pitiful figure in worn-out clothes, maybe even a faded scarf tied around her head. Instead, when the door swung open, she froze. Standing there was an impeccably dressed woman in a tailored pantsuit, stylish sunglasses perched on her nose. Her hair was perfectly styled, and her manicured nails gleamed as she extended a confident hand. She radiated poise and self-assurance. Mrs. Margaret stood dumbfounded, her mind racing to process who this could possibly be. "Hello there," the woman said coolly, sliding off her sunglasses with a practiced ease. "I'm Ms. Nina, Anna's mother." Mrs. Margaret's face drained of color, her carefully constructed assumptions crumbling in an instant. She had braced herself for anyone but this polished, commanding presence before her. Are you the cleaning lady?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper as she felt the ground shift beneath her. Ms. Nina raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk playing on her lips as if the question itself was absurd. "Cleaning lady?" "No, I'm afraid not," she replied smoothly. "Allow me to introduce myself properly. I'm the owner of a successful organic farm business, Country Roots." At that moment, Anna and James approached the doorway, drawn by the unexpected exchange. Anna bit her lip to suppress a grin, barely containing her amusement at the sight of her mother-in-law's stunned expression. James, on the other hand, looked just as shell-shocked as his mother. He'd always assumed Anna's family came from some remote rural area, far removed from the hustle and bustle of city life, but he'd never imagined they ran a thriving enterprise. The revelation hit him like a ton of bricks, leaving him speechless as he stood there, grappling with this new reality. Anna spoke in a hushed tone, barely above a whisper, trying not to draw any unnecessary attention to herself as she murmured, "Mom," with a cautious glance around the room. Ms. Nina, her mother, greeted her with a warm, comforting smile that seemed to wrap Anna in a blanket of reassurance. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said softly. "I hope I'm not interrupting your morning coffee ritual or anything." Mrs. Margaret, struggling to maintain her composure, took a deep breath to steady herself, determined to hold on to some semblance of poise despite the tension in the air. "Please, come in," she managed to say, her voice carefully measured, though a hint of strain seeped through. Ms. Nina, with a subtle, knowing smirk, finished the thought for her. "I suppose I don't quite fit your image of a small-town gal, do I? It's funny how our biases can blind us to what's really in front of us." Stepping into the elegantly furnished living room, Ms. Nina cast an appraising eye over the polished decor, from the sleek leather sofa to the framed art on the walls. "This is a lovely home you've got here," she remarked coolly, her tone devoid of any real admiration, though I've always been more of a country person myself. "Out there, the air's fresher, and folks tend to be a bit more genuine, don't you think?" Mrs. Margaret found herself at a loss for words, her earlier condescension toward Anna and her family now biting back, leaving her feeling exposed and foolish. Trying to ease the awkwardness that hung heavy in the room, James chimed in with a polite, "Why don't you take a seat, Ms. Nina? Can I get you a cup of coffee, or maybe some tea?" "Thanks, James," she replied, settling into a plush armchair with an air of quiet confidence. "But I'll stick to herbal tea if you don't mind. I've brought some with me, a special blend of herbs I grow on my little farm." Reaching into her tote bag, she pulled out a small, neatly tied pouch and handed it to Anna with a gentle nod. "Could you brew this up for us, honey? It's great for calming the nerves, especially on days like today." Anna took the pouch with a grateful smile and headed to the kitchen, feeling a surge of strength knowing her wise and steadfast mother was by her side. Mrs. Margaret watched the exchange in silence, a sinking feeling in her chest as she realized how badly she'd misjudged Anna and her family. Her own arrogance had painted her into a humiliating corner. The living room fell into an uneasy quiet, the kind that follows a sharp exchange at a family barbecue over who burned the burgers. James shifted uncomfortably from one foot to the other, unsure how to break the ice, while Mrs. Margaret's gaze bore into Ms. Nina, searching for any hint of her next move. After a long pause, Ms. Nina spoke up, her voice calm but firm, addressing Anna's mother-in-law directly. "Mrs. Margaret, I didn't come here to pick a fight or prove a point. I came to stand up for my daughter. I won't let anyone belittle her, especially not in her own home." Mrs. Margaret's cheeks flushed a deep crimson, and she stammered, I didn't mean to." But Ms. Nina cut her off with a steady, unflinching tone. "I know exactly what you think of Anna," she continued, her words sharp yet composed. "You see her as some naive country girl, not good enough for your son. But let me tell you something. Anna is the kindest, most honest, and hardworking person I've ever known. She loves your son with all her heart and does everything she can to make him happy. If you can't see that, well, that says more about your own narrow-mindedness than it does about her." Mrs. Margaret hung her head, unable to meet Ms. Nina's gaze, the weight of her own harsh words and actions pressing down on her like a heavy fog. She knew Ms. Nina was right, and the shame stung worse than a spilled cup of hot coffee on a Monday morning. "I hope you realize," Ms. Nina added quietly, "that your words didn't just hurt Anna, they cut me deep too. My husband and I have poured our hearts and souls into raising our daughter, and it breaks our hearts to see her being belittled and disrespected in any way." At that moment, Anna returned from the kitchen with a tray of steaming tea, the faint aroma of chamomile filling the room. She carefully placed the mismatched mugs on the coffee table, a little chipped but well loved, before settling down next to her mother on the worn-out couch. Ms. Nina reached for Anna's hand, giving it a gentle, reassuring squeeze, her touch warm and comforting like a familiar blanket on a chilly evening. "My dear," she said softly, her voice full of maternal warmth, "always remember that you're a strong and beautiful woman. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise, no matter what they say." Anna nodded quietly, her eyes glistening as she fought back tears, deeply touched by her mother's unwavering support and affection. Mrs. Margaret, on the other hand, started mumbling something under her breath, her words barely audible as she tried to backtrack on her earlier harsh comments, but Ms. Nina's firm tone cut her off before she could finish. "I'm not opposed to helping out with housework, Mrs. Margaret," Ms. Nina stated calmly, her voice steady as a rock. "But before I lift a finger, let's talk about fair compensation. After all, every bit of work deserves to be valued and paid for properly, don't you think?" Mrs. Margaret fell silent, caught off guard and unsure how to respond. She was used to calling the shots and setting her own terms, but now the situation had slipped entirely out of her grasp. Shame crept over her for her earlier words and biased assumptions, yet her pride stood in the way of admitting she was wrong. She felt cornered, like she'd been outmaneuvered at her own game. "Mom," James muttered under his breath, trying to catch her attention with a subtle nudge. "Maybe we shouldn't push this further." But Mrs. Margaret shot him a withering glare, her eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She didn't need his input right now. She'd handle this mess on her own terms, thank you very much. "I believe there's been a small misunderstanding," she said, forcing a tight smile and attempting to salvage her dignity. "I didn't mean to offend anyone. My choice of words was unfortunate." Ms. Nina raised an eyebrow, her expression dripping with skepticism about the sincerity of the apology. "Unfortunate?" she echoed, her tone laced with quiet challenge. "It seemed to me that you made your opinion about my daughter perfectly clear." Mrs. Margaret felt the polished facade of the sophisticated lady she'd worked so hard to maintain crumble right before her eyes. I only meant to say that Anna should focus more on homemaking," she stammered, grasping for an excuse. "She doesn't seem to know much about cooking or keeping a tidy house." Anna couldn't hold back a soft chuckle, the sound light but pointed. "Mrs. Margaret?" she said, her voice calm yet brimming with confidence. "I don't believe a woman's worth lies in being a maid. I work full-time, I'm pursuing my studies, and I strive to be a supportive partner. If you're not satisfied with how I manage the household, you're more than welcome to hire a professional cleaner with your own funds." Mrs. Margaret pressed her lips into a thin line, irritation flaring at the mention of her money. She loathed being reminded of her wealth in such a way. It was her tool, her leverage to control those around her, and now it was being turned against her. James, watching his mother lose her grip on the conversation, decided to step in before things escalated further. "Mom, please," he pleaded, his voice tinged with desperation. "Let's not turn this into a bigger argument. Anna is my wife, I love her, and I'm asking you to show her some respect." For the first time in ages, James stood his ground with a firmness he rarely showed. He was exhausted from his mother's constant nitpicking and her endless attempts to meddle in his life. He knew he had to stand up for his wife, even if it meant defying his mother's wishes. Mrs. Margaret stared at him, a mix of shock and disappointment flickering across her face. She'd always seen him as compliant, easy to steer, but now she noticed a newfound determination in his eyes, a strength she hadn't anticipated. It dawned on her that she was losing her hold not just over this tense exchange, but over her son as well. The room grew heavy with unspoken tension, the kind that often lingers after a family spat over Sunday roast or a forgotten invite to a backyard barbecue. Ms. Nina sipped her tea, the clink of the mug against the saucer cutting through the silence, while Anna glanced at James with a small, grateful smile, knowing they'd face whatever came next together. Anna let out a soft sigh, her voice tinged with exhaustion and a quiet resignation as she turned to James. "All right, James, I'll do my best, but you've got to see that I only want what's best for you, okay?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken frustration, but softened by genuine care. Meanwhile, Ms. Nina watched the shifting dynamics in this family with a faint, knowing smile. She understood that Mrs. Margaret wouldn't transform overnight, but she held on to a flicker of hope that this moment would teach her a valuable lesson about humility and understanding. Turning to Anna's mother-in-law, Ms. Nina spoke with a calm but firm tone. "Mrs. Margaret, I'm glad we had this chance to sit down and talk. I truly hope you've come to realize that judging someone based on where they come from or how much money they have in the bank is a grave mistake. A person's worth isn't tied to their family name or their wallet. It's about who they are inside." Mrs. Margaret gave a slight nod, her eyes darting away from Miss Nina's steady gaze, clearly uncomfortable. Deep down, she knew her arrogance and preconceived notions had landed her in this humbling, almost embarrassing position. Shame washed over her as she reflected on her harsh words and unfair actions. Anna, sensing her mother-in-law's turmoil, stepped forward and wrapped her in a gentle hug, grateful for the support and love she'd always received from her own family. "Thanks, Mom," she whispered softly, her voice barely audible but full of emotion. Ms. Nina responded with a tender smile, brushing a hand over Anna's hair. "I love you, sweetheart. Everything's going to be all right. Don't you worry." As Ms. Nina bid farewell to Anna and James, leaving Mrs. Margaret to stew in her thoughts, her eyes shone with a mix of maternal pride and unwavering affection for her daughter. "I'll give you a call soon," she said briskly to Anna before sliding into the sleek car waiting outside, a vehicle that seemed to carry away the last traces of tension lingering in Mrs. Margaret's apartment. After she left, a heavy silence settled over the room. Mrs. Margaret sat motionless in her armchair, staring blankly at the wall as if frozen in time. James, watching his mother, felt a pang of unease. He couldn't recall ever seeing her so lost and defeated. Anna, on the other hand, felt a surge of newfound strength and confidence. No longer did she feel small or defenseless. The weight of being judged for her background had finally lifted. Determined to break the oppressive quiet, she turned to her husband with a steady voice. "James, don't you think it's time we headed home? I reckon we've stayed long enough." Her tone was calm, but there was an undercurrent of resolve. James blinked, as if snapping out of a daze. "Yeah, sure thing," he mumbled, pushing himself up from the couch with a slight hesitation. As he stepped away to say goodbye to his mother, Anna stood alone for a moment, feeling a quiet triumph. It wasn't a victory born of spite, but rather a deep sense of justice and reclaimed dignity. When James returned, his expression was clouded with guilt and regret. "Anna, I'm really sorry," he started, stumbling over his words. "I should have stood up for you way sooner. I didn't know how to handle Mom, you know?" Anna reached out, taking his hand in hers with a reassuring squeeze. "James, it's okay. What matters is that you get it now. Just stick by me from here on out, all right?" He gripped her hand tightly, a determined look crossing his face. "I will, I promise. I won't let her speak to you like that ever again." Anna offered him a small, genuine smile, sensing the sincerity in his words. She knew this evening had been a turning point for him, a hard lesson she hoped he'd carry with him for life. A few days later, Anna and James were enjoying the peaceful calm of their own cozy apartment. James had become noticeably more attentive, always checking in on how Anna was feeling or asking for her take on little things, as if trying to make up for his earlier silence. One evening, as they sat down to a comforting dinner of homemade shepherd's pie, a staple comfort food Anna had grown to love since moving here, they were interrupted by the sharp ring of the phone. Anna glanced at the screen and saw it was Mrs. Margaret. Picking up, she heard a hesitant, almost timid voice on the other end. "Anna, it's me. Mrs. Margaret's words trailed off, uncertain, as if she was grappling with how to express what she felt. Earlier that day, Anna had noticed James fidgeting nervously over breakfast, clearly still unsettled by the family tension, even playfully nudging her about burning the toast as a way to lighten the mood. It was these small, everyday moments, grabbing a quick coffee from the local diner, bickering over who forgot to pick up milk, or sharing a laugh over a silly TV advert, that grounded them amidst the bigger emotional storms. Anna knew rebuilding trust with Mrs. Margaret wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that patience, much like waiting for the perfect cup of tea to brew, was key to mending things over time. "I owe you a heartfelt apology for everything I've said and done over the past while. I was completely in the wrong, and I see that now with absolute clarity." Anna sat quietly, her expression unreadable as she waited for more. "I know it might be hard for you to even consider forgiving me, and I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. Still, I had to get this off my chest. I'm truly ashamed of how I've acted," Mrs. Margaret added, her voice heavy with regret. Anna let out a long, thoughtful sigh. "Mrs. Margaret, I appreciate you taking the time to apologize, but I need a little space to process everything. It's not something I can just brush aside overnight," she replied softly but firmly. "I completely understand. I'm not expecting instant forgiveness. I just want you to know that my remorse is genuine," Mrs. Margaret responded with a somber tone. Their conversation came to a close. Anna set her phone down on the coffee table and glanced over at James, who was perched on the edge of the couch, holding his breath, clearly eager to hear what had happened. "So, what did she say?" he asked, leaning forward with curiosity. "She apologized," Anna said simply. "Said she feels awful about everything." James exhaled with visible relief, running a hand through his hair. "That's a relief to hear. I'm hoping this is the first step toward putting all this bad blood behind us," he said with a cautious optimism. Not long after, Anna found herself sitting at the worn oak table in the cozy kitchen of their family's countryside cottage with Miss Nina. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint scent of cinnamon rolls. Ms. Nina's specialty on quiet Saturday mornings like this. They sipped their drinks, the clink of mugs punctuating their conversation. "So, honey, how's your mother-in-law doing these days?" Ms. Nina asked, her tone warm but laced with a hint of concern as she passed Anna a plate of the warm rolls. "She's trying to make amends," Anna replied, taking a small bite and savoring the familiar comfort of the homemade treat. "Well, that's a start. The important thing is that she gets it. Respect isn't something you can just buy with a fancy gift or a check. It's gotta be earned through actions," Ms. Nina said with a knowing nod, her years of wisdom shining through as she stirred a spoonful of sugar into her coffee. Anna gave a small, agreeing nod, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "You're right, Mom. And I think, maybe, she's finally starting to figure that out," she said, a flicker of hope in her voice as she reflected on the morning's tense exchange.